The courtroom was filled with a hum of voices. The tall marble walls echoed every sound, creating a sense of pressure and tension. People in business suits whispered in the back rows, their gazes fixed on the man sitting at the defendant's table. Donald Trump sat calmly, his eyes directed straight ahead, his hands resting on the polished oak table. His face was impassive, but a cold calculation gleamed in his eyes. "Your Honor, allow me to clarify a few details." The opposing lawyer, a young, self-assured man in an expensive suit, took a few steps forward and turned to the judge. His voice was smooth, almost condescending. "Given the nature of the charges, we believe the defendant intentionally misled government authorities, exploiting loopholes in the law." The judge, a woman in her 50s in a formal robe, raised an eyebrow and leaned forward. "Mr. Trump, do you have anything to say about this?" Trump slowly lifted his head, his gaze sharpening like a knife's edge. He leaned back slightly in his chair and gave a faint smile. "Your Honor," his voice was even calm, but with a tone of confidence that made even the opposing lawyer tense. "I'm glad I have the opportunity to explain the situation." He slowly stood up, ran a hand over his jacket, and took a step forward. "What has just been said is not an argument. It's an assumption based on incomplete facts. It's important to remember that laws are not meant to be interpreted in ways that benefit specific individuals. They exist to protect the interests of all citizens." The judge narrowed her eyes. "Do you believe these charges are unfounded?" Trump paused for a moment, his gaze scanning the faces of the people in the courtroom. "Absolutely. Let me explain why." The back rows stirred. The opposing lawyer exchanged a look with the judge, but she silenced him with a gesture. Trump stepped closer to the table, placed his hands on the edge, and leaned slightly forward. The law they refer to was passed in 1987. If we look at the wording, we'll see that it leaves room for legal interpretation, especially when it comes to. Trump paused, letting the silence envelop the room. Economic transactions outside the jurisdiction of a state. The judge gave a barely perceptible nod. Trump smiled at the corners of his mouth. He saw that she was beginning to doubt. The opposing lawyer shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is an attempt to manipulate legal technicalities." Trump glanced at him and responded calmly. "This is the application of the law in its plain meaning. If anyone wants to challenge this interpretation, they are welcome to. But as long as the law stands on my side, all these charges are nothing more than speculation." The judge paused, studying Trump carefully, then lowered her gaze to the papers in front of her. "Proceed, Mr. Trump," she said after a moment of silence. He returned to his seat, crossed his arms over his chest. The hum in the courtroom quieted. A barely noticeable smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The first step had been taken. For several minutes after Jacob left the courtroom, the heavy tension that had hung in the air began to slowly dissipate. He could still feel the vibrations from the judge's laughter, from those light-hearted words she had just directed at Donald Trump. If it hadn't been for his cold-bloodedness and self-assurance, this situation could have been a disaster. But Trump seemed to have his strategy. A genius, Jacob thought, looking at the holographic map of court cases displayed on his phone screen. He felt that everything that had happened today was no accident. Trump, as always, had chosen a path others would consider unfeasible, yet one that ultimately had a better chance of success than anyone might have imagined. Trump had already regained his confidence after everyone in the room had laughed at his plan. "This isn't just a trial, it's a war, and I don't believe in losing." He had said it so calmly that even the biggest skeptics began to doubt their resolve. Jacob understood that many people judged Trump by his appearance and behavior. They forgot about his strategic mind, capable of outsmarting even the toughest systems. Everyone laughed at him, until he showed them how the right response could change the course of events. As Jacob exited the courthouse building, he felt the asphalt tremble beneath his feet. The city, which had seemed so harsh and soulless to him just a few minutes ago, now looked completely different. He remembered how, in his youth, he had strived to change society, to stand his ground at any cost. But today he understood that the path to change could sometimes be much subtler. He looked at his watch and pressed a button on his phone, calling his team for the next steps. Never give in to emotions, Jacob. Walk the path others are afraid to walk. And you'll understand why it's the only right decision. A new strategy echoed in his mind. This was the moment for change. And although the future remained unclear, Jacob had no doubt that even such unexpected twists of fate could be the beginning of something important. And Trump, no matter how much he was criticized, had passed on this idea to the world. Change is possible if you believe in yourself and your path. Only a few days remained before the next hearing. Jacob knew it would be a tough battle, but he was ready for it. He felt more confident than ever before. The next day, Jacob woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The trial seemed to him just the beginning of a much larger game, where all the participants were not just players, but parts of a much more complex machine. He not only began to understand how Trump skillfully manipulated the system, but also realized one important thing. It doesn't matter how many times people laugh at you if you know how to change the course of events through strategy. After drinking a cup of strong coffee and catching up on the news, Jacob decided that he needed to attend a few more hearings to better understand the system and find opportunities for his own influence. He didn't want to be as scandalous as Trump, but he saw how the habit of unexpected moves and calm control over the situation allowed him to win. On the day the judge resumed the hearing, Jacob sat in the courtroom, blending in with his unassuming appearance, and observed closely. He understood that he could not let himself be drawn into the emotional storm that Trump loved so much. Instead, he watched every movement, every word that came from the mouths of the attorneys, judges, and even Trump himself. These people think they know everything, but in reality, they act as if they're playing by the old-school rules. My path is different, Jacob thought, remembering again how Trump had neutralized the judge's mockery with one word, one expression. Meanwhile, one of the attorneys present at the trial began talking to him about strategy. You know, Jacob, we all think this is just a clash between two forces. But it's not. This is a battle for the future, for who will define the rules of the game, the attorney said, leaning toward him as the session paused for a moment. I understand, Jacob replied, still stunned by how quickly events were changing. By the evening of that day, after another observation of the trial, Jacob realized one thing, that even in the toughest moments, one must remain calm to not lose opportunities for maneuvering. Trump had done this quite simply, showing that his methods could change the overall rules of the game, even when everyone around him was laughing or not taking him seriously. During the break, Jacob reviewed the news once more. The headlines and the general mood in society were still not in Trump's favor, but he understood again, this man doesn't give up even when it seems like everyone is laughing at him. And that makes him stronger. That night, instead of preparing for negotiations and debates, Jacob decided to take a decisive step toward his own business and changes. He gathered his team for an important meeting, during which he reminded them of the importance of strategy and composure in the most difficult situations. In this battle, as in any other, it's not just what we do, but how we do it, Jacob said. We can't afford to give in to emotions, because in that case, we won't act with reason. Day by day, the court proceedings, like Jacob's internal transformation, gained momentum. He no longer saw Trump just as a political opponent, but as a person who knew how to benefit even from situations where others face defeat. The key is skill in managing the situation, Jacob thought as he left the courthouse the next day. Now I understand why he continues to remain strong. And although his own plans were still in the development stage, Jacob already felt that this period of change would bring him important lessons, and he would be ready to act as decisively as Trump when the time came for change. With each passing day, Jacob began to realize that he was standing on the threshold of something much bigger than just participating in a court trial. His experience in the courtroom became a kind of school for him, where he learned not only how to manipulate information, but also how to correctly put his opponents in situations where they couldn't avoid the traps he set. He understood that following the standard rules wasn't always necessary when you could change those rules to your advantage. At night, when the city had already fallen asleep, Jacob sat at his desk, reviewing documents and news, searching for the smallest details that could be the key to victory. He realized that to achieve his goal, he needed to create a complex network of allies, as well as have a clear understanding of his opponent's weaknesses. He decided to act in the shadows until he was ready for his next move. Jacob understood well that behind these strategies lay much more than just a desire to win in court. It was a game for survival in a larger political arena. And to win in it, you had to be not only strong but also capable of taking risks when everyone around you was afraid to do so. A few days after another court session, Jacob gathered his team for another important meeting. He came to them with a new action plan, but this time there were no usual ideals or templates. He decided to break old stereotypes and work with people who understood that acting quickly and uncompromisingly was the key. If we want to change the rules of the game, we must start with small steps, he began, his voice calm but decisive. And it doesn't matter how we are perceived or what people think of us. Our task is to remain inconspicuous until it's our turn to act. His team listened attentively. Each of them understood the importance of the changes they intended to bring about. Jacob proposed a plan that involved creating information campaigns to undermine the trust in their opponents, gathering important information, and manipulating documents that could become decisive in the next stages of the trial. And although it was a risky plan, he was ready to go ahead with it. The next few weeks became a period of constant preparation for Jacob. He launched several of his secret initiatives to create circumstances that would play in his favor. Thanks to this, he was able to form a few alliances with people who had previously been insignificant figures in the large political game, but who could now become his important partners. At the same time, he began his own media campaign, creating news that gradually became more popular, and even small tidbits of information started to attract attention to his figure and ideas. This was the first step in the real game. Trump had used the media well, and Jacob decided to follow this approach by creating his own image and interpreting the situation in a way that was beneficial to him. One day, when Jacob began to feel that his plans were gaining momentum, he received a call from one of the lawyers working for Trump. The lawyer's voice was anxious. "Jacob, we have a problem. Your recent moves have attracted the attention of more powerful players, and now we need to be careful," the lawyer said. Jacob wasn't scared. On the contrary, he felt that the time for change had come. He wasn't just playing by the rules. He had become the author of those rules. "I'm ready," he replied, staying calm. "If we want to win, now is the time to start the serious game." This call was just another confirmation that Jacob was on the brink of a major turn, and his strategy was already starting to work. He knew that his place in the larger political game was just beginning, and this time he had no intention of backing down. A few weeks after the significant changes, Jacob began to feel that his strategy had achieved the desired effect. Not only had he managed to gain media popularity for his plan, but he had also become an important figure on the political stage, drawing the attention of all the players. His manipulations and media campaigns were starting to bear fruit, and he was no longer just a participant in the game. He had become its architect. However, at one point, when everything seemed to be going according to plan, new, unforeseen problems arose. Those he had once considered his allies began to doubt his actions. Rumors about his method spread, and now even some of his closest partners began to feel threatened by his ruthless strategies. Trump, who had long been his ideal, became something more for Jacob. He had been influenced by his business style, but not his ruthlessness. Nevertheless, Jacob was determined to finish what he had started. His decision became clear. He was ready for the final battle, the climax that would determine his place in this game. The time came when he was forced to step into the spotlight and confront those who might have betrayed him, as well as those who stood in his way. This was the last part of his plan, not just to shift his position in the political spectrum, but also to demonstrate his power and control the outcome. A huge crowd gathered in the hall as Jacob stepped onto the stage. All eyes were fixed on him. He stood confidently, feeling the gazes upon him. But inside, there was only silence. This was the moment when all these intricate calculations were supposed to come to life. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to change everything." His words rang out clearly, and it was more than just a political maneuver. It was a challenge. No one could predict how this story would end. Would Jacob be the one to change the system, or would his efforts be in vain because of those preparing their opposition behind the scenes? This question remained unanswered until the very last moment, but one thing was clear. His political path had gained such momentum that he now had every opportunity to become a true player on the big stage, or vanish forever into the shadow of his ambitions. The hall fell silent again, and Jacob felt that all eyes were on him. All those gazes had become his new strength. He wasn't just ready for the end. He was ready to change the rules of this game forever. And this was just the beginning. Jacob stood on the stage, feeling the hum of the crowd grow louder and louder. Those who had once doubted his abilities were now beginning to look at him differently. There was only one thing left to do, take the final step, and this story would be over. He would have hated this moment, had he not realized that this very moment would define his entire future. "I'm not going to pretend," he continued. "I'm not like everyone else. But I know one thing for sure. To change the system, you have to start with yourself. And I will do that." His voice was firm, but with a smile that was neither dirty nor arrogant. It was the smile of someone who had seen much more than just political intrigues or behind-the-scenes games. It was the smile of a person who had found their purpose and was ready to face any challenge to achieve it. Now Jacob saw that even in a world where everything is going wrong, where power and ambition often change people, true strength lies in changing oneself. And that was something he had proven not only to himself, but to others as well. Suddenly, a voice came from the crowd. "Are you changing the system or playing by its rules?" It was the same question that had haunted him all this time. Jacob smiled as he recalled the words he had said many years ago, when he had just begun his journey to success. And now he understood that even if change comes slowly and with difficulty, small steps still matter. "I'm changing the system, but only because I'm starting with myself." And with those words, he took the final step toward a new chapter in his life. A step that offered no guarantees, but perhaps was the only path to real change. The crowd dispersed, but Jacob no longer worried about what would come next. He knew one thing: every choice he made, every action he took, could change at least one moment, one outcome. And that was enough to keep moving forward. Step by step,